From accusing him of not respecting the game, to simply saying he isn't top 10 UFC material. Let's take a look at the worst comments fighters have made about Paddy Pimblett. Right off the bat, Sean O'Malley called him ugly and stupid. Now, O'Malley is no stranger to getting called out. I mean, it comes with the territory, but to be put on blast by a UFC newbie? That was a new one. Let me give you guys a rundown of the beef between the two fighters. It all started when Pimblett called O'Malley a bitch and a pothead for blaming his 2020 loss against Marlon Vera on a leg injury.
A bit of a bitch ass, like, isn't he? You know what I mean? Hurt his ankle and blamed his loss on that. He's a little pothead, so that's off to him, lad. He's still getting shit done while he's stoned half the times.
Now, while Sugar was surprised by Pimblett's comments, in an interview with Ariel Helwani, he talked about how he understood the motivation behind it. And let me just tell you guys, O'Malley definitely didn't hold back. He talked about how he didn't even know of Paddy's existence. That is, until the UFC started to post stuff about the baddie. Sean then continued on to call the former Cage Warriors champ ugly and stupid. But he did say that it was incredibly smart of Paddy to use his name for marketing, since Sean is such a cash cow.
I don't know what his beef was with me, but I mean, he's kind of as ugly and stupid as he may look, he's kind of smart. He's talking about the biggest names in UFC.
Sugar also dismissed all rumors of a fight happening with Pimblett soon, but he did hint at a potential super fight down the road. So that's something fans definitely look forward to. It doesn't matter when the fight takes place. One thing's for sure, it'll be a treat to watch. Until then, how about a fight that's already happened? I'm talking about Pimblett's controversial win at UFC 282. The baddie remains undefeated in the UFC so far, but it turns out many of his fellow fighters think he shouldn't hold that achievement, especially after UFC 282. Pimblett took home a unanimous decision over Jared Gordon, who repeatedly cracked him with hard punches in all 3 rounds. The judges then decided to award Pimblett a unanimous 29-28 score.
All 3 judges score this contest 29-28 for the winner by unanimous decision, Paddy!
Pretty soon, social media was flooded with fans labeling the whole thing as a robbery. And obviously, UFC fighters had some thoughts about it too. UFC bantamweight champion Aljamain Sterling insisted that Gordon deserved the victory, and he wasn't the only one. Former UFC superstars Nate Diaz and Henry Cejudo called the result the worst decision in UFC history. Even UFC prospect Terrence McKinney vowed to avenge Jared by killing Paddy in a potential matchup. Yeah, that's a bit too far. Fighters just couldn't help but criticize Pimblett's poor performance. Nobody could understand how the decision was made, when clearly Gordon had been the better fighter in the octagon. That's not all, guys. Despite this win, many still find it hard to believe that Paddy is destined for a bright future in the UFC, including Professional Fighters League featherweight champion Brendan Loughnane. Everyone knows that UFC has been putting a lot of efforts to promote Paddy as a potential future star, but his former training partner doesn't seem to think Paddy's destined for that future. Loughnane believes that Pimblett will never be able to crack the top 10, let alone win a championship. The PFL champ spoke about how he trains with the top 10 UFC guys all the time, and he's aware of their levels and how scary they can get.
Maybe he thinks he is, but I really don't, and I know I train with the top 10 UFC guys on a regular, and I know the levels. It's scary.
According to Brendan, Pimblett comes nowhere near them in terms of skills, but he didn't write the baddie off completely. Brendan spoke about the fact that the rising UFC star seems to get wins all the time. Plus, he complimented how Paddy pulls chokes out of nowhere and is a good grappler. Still, the question remained, is it enough? The PFL champ doesn't seem to think so. I mean, everyone knows that Paddy has his work cut out for him if he wants to go all the way in the UFC. There's no doubt that he's far from a mediocre fighter and has some pretty amazing wins under his name right now, but he still needs to prove his talent in the ring. That said, it's safe to say that Paddy earned himself quite a few enemies after UFC 282. For instance, Joe Solecki. During a recent interview with Inside Fighting, Solecki stated that he'd like to share the octagon with the baddie down the line, but he did insist that he wouldn't beg for the spot opposite the Scouser.
Would I love to fight Paddy? 100%. I think that's a great matchup for me. I think it's a high profile matchup that kind of haven't been in before. But I'm not going to sit here and beg for anything.
Joe even offered to meet the former Cage Warriors champ on his home turf. Selecki then went on to assess Paddy's chances of reaching the high ambitions he holds for the UFC. Right from the start, he suggested that the baddie doesn't treat MMA with the respect it deserves. The New Jersey native also predicted a quick fall from grace for Pimblett as soon as he arrives at top 15 level competition, stating that he just doesn't think that a guy that gets hit like that, and also because he doesn't show any sign of improvement in his footwork or head movement, he gets to stay in the top 15 for a very long time. At the end of the day, Selecki believes that Paddy hasn't made the jump from fighter to professional athlete yet, but he's far from the only fighter to make such claims. There's another fighter who had less than complimentary things to say about the baddie. I'm talking about Bobby Green. Now, Green was asked in an interview with Eurosport if he'd be willing to face the Brit after watching him beat Jared. Bobby then stated that being offered to fight Paddy would nearly be offensive, since the former Cage Warriors champ's skills are amateur at best. On top of that, King explained that Paddy would never take the fight, and how he lacks the skills to even dance with him. Yikes. While King doesn't expect the fight to happen anytime soon, since the both of them are on completely different levels, he made it clear that he'd accept the offer if it came his way. In Bobby's eyes, the whole fight would be an easy win, even if it doesn't do much to move him up the ladder. Green added that he'd just do it for shits and giggles. According to King, Paddy doesn't even belong in the octagon, but as wild as some of these comments have been, the next criticism definitely would have hurt Pimblett because it came from Michael Bisping. Having built a reputation for being an outspoken fighter himself, Michael decided to give the rising star of the UFC some advice. Now, before his controversial win, Paddy spoke about how he should be paid to do interviews.
You just console me in a fair, but know what, Joe? Have you consulted me manager and see how much you're paying me for this interview?
That's something Bisping disagrees with. According to Michael, Pimblett needs to tone down the confidence until he puts on an impressive performance against some top-tier competition. This is something a lot of people agree with. I mean, Paddy's all talk until he finds someone top level to get into the ring with. Not only that, but Bisping believes that what Paddy needs to do is just humble himself a little bit. Bisping spoke on his podcast about how Pimblett needs to stop with this "I'm the new cash cow" shit.
That's what he experienced there. I think what Paddy needs to do is just humble himself a little bit, stop with this "I'm the new cash cow" shit.
The UFC Hall of Famer added that Paddy should understand that when you're dominating people, it's all well and good, but when you're struggling to get a victory, it just doesn't have the same effect. It can just end up rubbing people the wrong way. At the end of the day, the whole "pay me for the interview" thing left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. He explained that Dustin Poirier, Islam Makhachev, Charles Oliveira are all household names in MMA, and if they're not doing all that, then why is Paddy? Good question. Well, there you have it. Those were the worst comments fighters have made about Paddy Pimblett.